Today we're speaking with Dr. Martin Blaze, Professor of English at Sonoma State University. Dr. Blaze recently spoke at Surviving the Holocaust series on Sonoma State University campus and spoke on literature, poetry, and plays about the Holocaust. Hello, Dr. Blaze.
Hi.
Perhaps we could begin the interview by asking how your topic relates overall to the series now being taught at Sonoma State University.
Well, the series emphasized different aspects of the Holocaust experience, the background of this historical moment, the experiences of some of the survivors, as well as many other topics relating to this historical phenomenon, and literature was one of the outcomes of the Holocaust experience. That is, people during the Holocaust felt the very strong need to write about what was going on in diaries and in factual accounts, and survivors of the Holocaust felt the same need to recount their experiences, so that the world would know what happened, in the hope that it wouldn't happen again. There was some writing that was done. Elie Wiesel states that the reason he writes about the Holocaust, although as I indicated in my lecture, that no piece of writing could possibly do could possibly capture the experience that occurred. Nevertheless, he wrote to somehow bring the dead back to life, in order to as a kind of memorial to them, so that this need to witness what had occurred, what was occurring, and what had occurred, was uppermost in the minds of the writers who did finally write about, that is, the survivors who finally did write about their experiences.
Why did you, what brought you to the decision to teach a course that's often so difficult to understand?
Well, I do teach a course in modern European literature, and it is very difficult to write about, to do a course with about modern European literature without including literature of the Holocaust. It's a very significant contribution, if you want to look at it in those broad terms, in terms of literature itself. It is a very significant contribution to modern literature, and in dealing with a historical fact and the human response to that historical fact that had never before occurred in quite this particular way, is to bring something of a new dimension or a new understanding into to bring as I say, a new dimension into the way we understand the nature of human existence. Whatever it is we learn from literature, whatever it is we observe in the reading and experiencing of literature, can also apply, or that purpose of learning from literature can also apply to the literature of the Holocaust. And it is particularly significant, as I said a moment ago, in that what did occur was unique in the history of mankind, in its horror, in its brutality, in its viciousness, was totally new in the history of humanity, which had experienced in the past pogroms and destruction of populations and so on. This somehow added a new dimension or a new insight into what humanity was what human beings were capable of.
Well, let me ask you a related question to that.
Sure.
With the Second World War so close behind us, people living today, if we're involved in the Second World War, and with such a catastrophe as the Holocaust, why is it that today young people often know very little what happened, its causes and consequences?
Well, there are probably at least two answers to that. One a general one, in that people, young people, and this I'm made aware of in my classes, not only my class in modern European literature, but in my other classes as well, do not historical sense. That is, they're not too knowledgeable about what has gone on, even in the recent past, as knowledgeable as they should be. The second answer I can give to that question is that the Holocaust experience is a very painful one. That is, it is something that even a historically minded or a person is to confronting. That is, one could know history, read about massacres, and read about wars, and read about man's inhumanity to man, but somehow. But somehow, when confronting the historical fact of the Holocaust, there is something so devastating about this experience, so extreme in its cruelty and in its mystery, that people would prefer to deny. The psychological mechanisms of denial seem to operate here, and either. People try to see it as part of some kind of historical moment, or try to repress it altogether. See it as part of some historical movement that they can understand, and thereby undermining or in some way diluting the nature of the whole experience, or just by forgetting about it altogether, which is or not finding out about it altogether, which is a kind of ultimate form, I suppose.
Was there? In terms of literature, novels that have been written, what's been said in terms of the idea that the Jewish people were really abandoned by the rest of the world?
Well, historically, this seems to have been so. That is, with all of the knowledge about what was going on that was disseminated, the sort of action that you would that we would have expected the Allied governments to take to try and save the Jews just wasn't done. I mean, it just didn't happen. And the people who wrote their diaries and their daily entries into when they could write things down, one of their cries was, why has not the world responded to what is going on? Material was getting out. The Polish underground courier Jan Karski, who spoke here once incidentally as part of the Holocaust memorial services, I think it was about 3 years ago, visited an extermination camp and saw exactly what was going on. And when he reported this to the Allies, the United States and Great Britain, reported this and hoped, in the hope that something would be done about it. It just all of this information was not acted upon, and the Jews who were aware of this, who were being transported, who were being exterminated, actually felt that they were being exterminated in the middle of they were being observed. It was known, and as a result of that, felt that they were being abandoned, and there was something of a despair and an intensification of the despair that comes out in these diaries. An intensification that is the result of the recognition that the world was looking on this and not doing anything about it.
In terms of that evidence that you've been speaking about, pictures of gas chambers, other people visiting, extermination processes from survivors who escaped.
Mm-hmm.
Why wasn't that evidence acted on? We've spoken about the idea that the people themselves felt that they were abandoned, but And were they actually abandoned, or there are other reasons the Allies didn't go in?
I suppose there were reasons of strategy and war could be stated. That is, it was not part of the strategy of the Allies to bomb railroad tracks or to bomb trains or to bomb the extermination centers, even though the places they did bomb were only a couple of miles away. One could give the excuse that this was not part of the strategy, that it would have resulted in losses, in Allied losses. I suppose one can say that, but if you look at it, fairly closely, not even very closely, it seems more of an excuse to avoid doing what is humane and necessary, and what would have helped a great deal. The excuses given were just ways of avoiding taking that kind of action, and it could very easily be, you say again, one could get an intensified or experience an intensified sense of despair, and interpret this as just an abandonment, that the people who were in a position to do something just didn't want to. There are some books written on this very subject about how much knowledge there was. There are excuses that, well, we really didn't know enough, that there really wasn't enough known and it couldn't be trusted. Some people felt that it was just something of a repeat of what the anti-German propaganda of the First World War, when people were saying that the Germans were killing children and women and devastating, doing all sorts of horrible things, that this was seen as just a kind of propaganda, and that this kind of evidence or this kind of talk was just another repeat of that anti-Hun propaganda that existed in the First World War. That apparently the Allies didn't want to take that kind of chance.
Well, it seems that there are a few other questions that this brings rise to. One of the questions is that if it's true, if there were no excuses for what happened during the Second World War, if it's true that the Jewish people were abandoned, what's the message for the average person who's listening to this and hears that this took place during the Second World War? Perhaps their parents or their grandparents were involved. What's the message to them?
The message, if understood as I've tried to articulate here, is that as Jews, they were visible. That they were not considered significant enough as human beings for some sort of effort to be made. They can draw something, I suppose, equally a horrible conclusion by coming to realize that mankind, or that people are indeed not willing to extend themselves, not willing to take the kind of chance necessary, or to act on the basis of humanitarian reasons or a sense of human brotherhood. That people are not willing to act on that basis, and are in fact willing to allow the most horrible things to happen if it doesn't immediately affect them politically or economically, or in some other way that is deemed more important than the effects on their conscience of this sort of an indifference to this degree of human suffering. I suppose people could come away with a sense that humanity is unredeemable, that the most horrible kinds of actions provoked indifference rather than some positive action to help.
And is this that you see as existing today, or has the situation changed?
No, there are It seems that, well, in looking at the Iran Contra hearings, the various witnesses have spoken about what was going on between the National Security Council and the Iranians as business deals. Somehow there was money to be made, or this would be effective, or that wouldn't be effective. It had to do with cost. It had to do with any number of things that we could relate to business. Now, maybe the business was being, evoked as a kind of metaphor for describing what was going on. But it seems in all of this talk that is being presented on the TV right now that there is a total disregard that they were dealing in instruments that were killing people. That as a result of this or that deal, a bomb was dropped someplace, or many bombs were dropped, and that many people got killed, or that many women and children were destroyed. Let's say there in Iran, Iraq, or Nicaragua, as a result of these dealings. So that this kind of indifference, this kind of insensitivity to human suffering, and the elevation of some kind of a political policy or some kind of program of purpose, national purpose, that requires disregarding the fact of human suffering, seems to be still with us as it was back then.
One of the problems that it seems to me that we face today, when we talk about anti-Semitism or persecution of the Jewish people,
mm-hmm.
If the question is asked of me, I say I'm not one of those people.
No.
And often you'll hear people saying that's not me.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever we talk about anti-Semitism, who are we talking about? Who are the people, and where are they, and what's the solution to the problem?
The solution to the problem of anti-Semitism? I wish I knew. I would have suggested it a long time ago. But based on the evidence that of the past and of the Holocaust, it seems that even if you come up with a solution, and if you come up with a thing that might do, that might alleviate these problems of anti-Semitism and racism in general, that somehow you're not listened to. That it just doesn't matter. As far as the people, as far as who the anti-Semites are, who the racists are, I suppose we can say, well, the racists are the ones, or the anti-Semites are the ones who do anti-Semitic things, who destroy synagogues, or who, if they're in a position of power, create policy that places Jews a position of second-class citizens. These are the racists. These are the anti-Semites. And I suppose you can say anyone who goes along with this, anyone who approves, tacitly approves, or of some kind of racist or anti-Semitic policy, although not specifically involved in anti-Semitic or racist acts, could also be considered racist and one of the things that the Holocaust has taught us is that when these unspeakable acts and policies emerge, that there has to be a good deal of response to it, criticism of it, hostility toward any legislation or any action or any policy that would result in racism and the destruction of people because they happen to be black, or because they happen to be Jewish, or because they happen to be gypsies, or whatever the unfavored group happens to be at that moment.
And if you have the opportunity, and I'm sure you do, with each semester, what's the message? What's the main theme or the message that you have to express to people today?
The message is not to collaborate. Is not to go along with that which is obviously destructive. That which is obviously regarding some people as disposable, as dispensable. People who are, let's say, unworthy of existing on the planet for whatever reason. Now we can't all get involved in some ultimate degree of political action, but a consciousness, it seems to me, of what is going on, and the refusal to collaborate insofar as one can make this kind of refusal. I think this is the kind of message I try to convey.
Okay. Thank you. We're out of time now.
Oh, really?
And that's it. Thanks very much.
Sure.
Speaking with Dr. Sanford Lowe, Professor of Humanities. Come on. Good afternoon. This afternoon we're speaking with Dr. Sanford Lowe, Professor of Humanities at Santa Rosa Junior College. Dr. Lowe has been speaking at a series on the Holocaust at Sonoma State University concerning religion and cultural roots of Semitism. Good afternoon, Dr. Lowe.
Good afternoon.
You mentioned briefly in your lecture that the churches had recognized the problem of anti-Semitism and had begun to respond. Could you perhaps go a little bit further with that?
Yes, I think that immediately after the war there was still not that clear recognition or connection. I think that it was not really until the Second Vatican Council that there was any major breakthrough in establishing some sort of dialogue, some sort of reflection on the problem, I think, that I tried to describe in my lecture, which is the age-old connection between the religiosity of Christianity and the roots, theological roots, as it were, of anti-Semitism.
Now, are you suggesting in your lecture that the New Testament is an anti-Semitic document?
It has been used that way. What I was suggesting in my lecture is a way around that. I don't think, in all honesty, I don't think that the New Testament was written with that in mind. But the literature of the New Testament, and this is the point I was trying to make, the literature of the New Testament emerged as part of a religio-political struggle on the part of the early church to establish itself, define itself over and against a similarly besieged and emergent rabbinic Judaism. These two remnant groups, I say remnant because they both were the only groups that managed to survive a horrendous war that the Romans had fought with the Jewish people. And they emerged out of it trying to make sense out of the world. The rabbis went on, in effect, to create rabbinic Judaism over the next 800 years. The Christians emerged trying to make sense out of their messianic expectation and out of their faith in Jesus as the Christ. I think that the early church, and this is what the early church felt that it was not getting a hearing, that its own people, that is to say the Jews in the synagogue, were not really understanding what they had to say. And in fact, they were being understood. In the course of their rejection, they wrote documents in part to explain to themselves what their own faith was, but I think a lot of their bitterness and a lot of their anger at, if you will, the parent organization came through. So the New Testament, then, I'm saying, is filled with anger and editorial hostility toward a rabbinic establishment. All of this is put pretty much onto the lips of Jesus, and for someone who doesn't read the New Testament critically, that is to say, for someone who doesn't try to understand the origins of the bitterness, the nastiness, the anti-Judaism that gets expressed in much of New Testament literature, then document.
Now, if you're speaking to, obviously your ideas are not so specifically aimed at Jewish people. The education that's taking place here is for Christians to understand the history of their own religion. Isn't it almost impossible what you're trying to do? I mean, you're attacking, in a sense, the foundation of their religion, and leaving them, if they finally, if the outcome is that they believe you, what are they left with? And isn't that the problem?
Yes, very. And first, I'm not doing the attacking. If it were a unique idea with me, I'd be in a lot of trouble. This is not a secret, and Jewish people, I think, have known this and have thought of these things for centuries. But in fact, this is the scandal of it. In fact, there has been no systematic, scientific action on the past until after the Holocaust. In 1935, you would not get any attempt at all on reflecting on the past. The Jews were Christ killers, and they were damned, and they were to suffer through all of history, and no one challenged it. I mean, it was the greatest scholars, the greatest Christian scholars did challenge it. I'm saying that it was as a result of the Holocaust, whether there's anyone who wants to admit it openly or not, was as a result of the Holocaust that people of goodwill within the church were forced by conscience and by history to re-examine their own history and the very roots of theology. The point that you raise is a good one. Here's the book that I quoted in my lecture called Faith and Fratricide. And it's subtitled The Theological Roots of Anti-Semitism. This is a Catholic lay scholar, Rosemary Radford Ruther. Introduction by Gregory Baum, who is also a Catholic scholar.
These are scholars that are recognized by the Roman Catholic Church.
Yes, and throughout the field of religious history. And they have raised these questions. But I think they're raising these questions in part also in response to questions that were raised at the Second Vatican Council in the early 60s. I mean, I'm saying there are people of goodwill within all the churches who began to respond because of the Holocaust.
Now, what are some of the questions that they raised?
What are the theological roots? What are the roots of anti-Semitism? And I'm saying these questions I don't think are asked openly, but I think the questions are, does the church bear any moral responsibility for the consequences of anti-Semitism? This is not to say, does the church bear responsibility for Hitler, because I think there are far many people who are responsible for that than just the church. But for the anti-Semitism that went, that developed, that nurtured, that was brought almost to a fine art through the hundreds and hundreds of years of European history preceding Hitler, that's the problem. And I think that there are people within the church that recognize that.
And if the outcome is that students, or those interested in the roots of anti-Semitism, come to an understanding that the fault is at the root of their religion, that were on the mouths of, let's say, Jesus, because the intention was to make him say certain things about Jewish people. What is... you must have thought for yourself about what are the consequences for those people who they come to realize that this is anti-Semitic, but now they're left with this question of their religion.
Yeah, I think there's a real focus that will have to be made again on the figure of Jesus, and this is not simply for the church, but I think also for Jewish people. One of the things that the Vatican Council called for was a dialogue, not a monologue. And the dialogue has been approached with a certain amount of trepidation. People on both sides have not leaped into it. But the church, I say, is willing to, seems willing to open the doors to the pen, to take a look at the past and to view it critically. With a faith, I think, that at the core there still will be a Jesus, and there still will be a message of faith for people who can believe that is fundamentally humane. I don't think anybody in the church really believes, anybody in the church really believes that Jesus was anti-Semitic. Dreisch, as I mentioned in the lecture, who was a Nazi, he said that. But that's patently absurd. So I think that there is a core. I think this is one part of the excitement, I think, today in critical New Testament studies and what is called the quest for the historical Jesus, is that at the core there still is a Jesus there of great integrity for people of faith. And I think this is something also that Jews have to risk taking a look at, that there really was, that he had a message of import which came to be a message and a religion for the Gentile world. I don't think that means that we have to beat each other's throats. In fact, there has been two separate historical developments, and at times the two religions have come together, sometimes in friendliness, but a lot of the time with great hostility. That's history. That's not to be changed. And I think the only way out of the conundrum that we found ourselves in the Holocaust, and I say we think it was a Christian problem as much as a Jewish problem, the only way out is for the two sides to sit down and to take a look at our history, to get our mutual history together.
And what's your experience? You teach courses on a regular basis at the Center West Junior College. What's your experience with students going through? How are they responding to your message?
Well, if I take it slowly, it's been very good. Which is to say that I very often see people who are themselves have great faith and are Christians responding with great excitement, because we are risking raising adult and critical questions about material that more often than not is treated with sublime simplicity, Sunday school simplicity. And I'm afraid that in the shadow of the Holocaust, that's not good enough any longer. And I think people are grateful for the opportunity to back off and take a long, historical, and honest look at what has happened. People have, I think we're fortunate here. I have encountered virtually no anti-Semitism in the classroom situation that is deliberate or conscious. And when we encounter it, people are almost shocked. That is to say, very often I'm the one who has to point it out and say, well, look what's here. People are shocked and horrified by it. But I think that we manage to deal with it in a way that is enlightening and that preserves our sense of dignity. And for many people, so I'm told, from Christians who have risked going into it, that they come out of it with a deeper and more profound of faith. What can I say? An adult faith.
What is, if you could sum it up, if you could say it briefly, what your message is, and perhaps why you chose, what drew you into teaching a course like this that's probably very difficult for many people to understand or appreciate?
It was difficult for me when I started, and I think that I started doing it because I studied it myself. I was a child during the war, and was a child at living in New York when the concentration camps were liberated at the end of the war. My family had always spoken in very hushed terms and trying to protect me from this, but all at once the vividness of it leaped into the press, into the movies and those. And I saw a movie-tone newsreel of the concentration camps as a child and asked people the child's question, which is, how could this have happened? Or not where the child's question was, how could God have allowed this to happen? And nobody, of course, could answer. And as I grew older, I began to ask the question that could possibly be answered, which is, how did this happen? How could it? And I think that we are all old enough now to ask that kind of question and to take the kind of critical look at it that will allow us to understand how such things could happen. So my own teaching has been a process of studying. And I felt early on, in my own studies, recognized that there was something inherent in religious, in theological talk itself, that held the seed of anti-Semitism. I'll tell you very, very honestly that when I first encountered this book some years ago, I was shocked. I was genuinely shocked, not only to see my own thoughts or things I had been thinking about in writing, but that it should have come with such integrity and such force from Catholic scholarship. I was almost bewildered by it.
If enough of this takes place, if enough of this education takes place, questioning, looking critically at the New Testament and Judaism itself, probably, what do you see as the outcome? What's the
a more mature expression of Christianity. I think it's possible. It may take a long time. Or I don't know. We can think, for instance, of the Christianity of the Middle Ages, so preoccupied with demons and spirits and gargoyles and visions of hell and purgatory, and so, it was so utterly characteristic of medieval Christianity that to modern people it's almost strange. But so I think that Christianity, I think all great religions go through long periods of growth and change, and I think that Christianity will do that if it's going to survive. If it's going to survive, and if it's going to be anything meaningful for people in the world, then it's going to learn from its own historic experience. I think that the beginning, there is a small beginning. What disturbs me, I suspect, is that there is a good dialogue. There's really good critical dialogue that goes on now in the halls of the academy and in the seminary, and to a certain extent in polite conversation between the leaders of religious groups, or rabbis and priests and bishops, and so forth. And it's all very nice. I have even heard of changed curriculum. The church has been working, some churches have been working more diligently than others, and actually changing the curriculum for children in religious schools, in parochial schools. Many churches have actually changed their liturgy so that passages which, if just read uncritically, and generally when you're involved in liturgy, you go to church and you hear prayers read, or you hear passages from Scripture read, they're not read critically, they're just read as divine statements. That some of the churches, the Catholic Church being one, has actually moved to change, to edit some of the words of Scripture as they are read in churches.
Is this because they reflect?
Because if they were read, if they were read straight out of Scripture, they're anti-Semitic. Given the 20th century, given the context that we have learned, they cannot be understood any other way but as anti-Semitic statements. So they're changing them, which I think is an incredible thing. This is the real conundrum, you see, is that you cannot go back to the sacred literature itself and change it. Go back and say, well, this is anti-Semitic, let's take it out. Or this is anti-woman, let's take it out. I mean, you may want to do that, but it's a historic document. More than it's a sacred historic document. It can't be done. Our only hope, then, is to be able to develop a critical mind so that whenever we read it, we can read it as a historical document and not, here's where people are going to get angry, and not as God's written in stone. But I think, you see, that's the great risk. I would like to reflect on there's on a thought that shook me deeply. Not too long ago, there's a rabbi, an Orthodox rabbi in this country who has done some very wonderful work in this field. Irving Greenberg is his name, and he suggests, and I am persuaded, that if one wants to continue being religious in a covenantal sense, that is, either as a Jew or as a Christian who still believes that God has a covenant with us, whether with the Jewish people or with the church, that there's still some sort of dialogue that goes on between God and humankind, that relationship has gone through great changes. That which happened 3,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago is not the only event and is not the only revelation that defines our relationship with God. Greenberg actually suggests that the Holocaust itself may be, as we get distance from it, may be a new revelation. And if we really, that there is, or for people who do believe that there is a living God who works in history, then what does the Holocaust tell us? Then we must learn something from it. Then is God teaching us something in the Holocaust? And then Greenberg goes suggests, makes some suggestions on then what is it God is telling us. I'm not sure that he knows or I know at this point what the answer is, but he comes up with a rule of thumb, and I want to quote it properly for you. He says, if you're going to talk theology, then you have to be very careful. That no statement should be made, he says, no statement should be made that could not be made in the presence of the burning children.
That's a powerful statement.
Yes. What that, okay, I have to pause myself because what I think what that means is that we cannot come up with easy answers, facile theological answers from theologians who sit in the universities or wherever, or TV evangelists, or anyone who comes up with really quick answers.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yes, well, the Jews got what they deserved because they did this or that. So somewhere in that diabolical suffering, perhaps, is a new approach. And in fact, I think that there are people of goodwill on all sides who are willing to take a look at that.
And are you saying that, perhaps as a summary question, people are willing to look critically at the roots of their religion and their beliefs?
Mm-hmm.
That there's a chance that this is the way to prevent something like the Holocaust from taking place again?
Not just at the roots, but the roots and the history. And there's no religion in the Western world that is clean. Mm-hmm. All have wonderful revelations at the beginning, and they're filthy as they get dragged on through history. So the courage comes in being able, at the heights of the revelation and the filth of history itself, somewhere in there is a more mature faith.
Great. Thank you very much.